The first time I heard them, they were killing a deer. It looked like they ran it through a lawnmower.
Since the beginning, people haven't liked large carnivores. They wiped them out.
So you see a cascading effect by the loss of those top predators.
It's a story about losing predators causing the current situation which we have.
The continued loss of one population after the other, you know that something has happened.
Humans expand and nature contracts. The obvious endpoint of that is a world without nature.
It's like something out of science fiction. Unsettling transformations are sweeping across the planet. And clue by clue, investigators are assembling a new picture of Earth. They suspect we've entered a time of faster global change than any human being has ever witnessed. Where are we headed? What can we do to alter the course? In this confusing era, only one thing is certain. These are strange days on planet Earth.
What do most of us look for in our neighborhoods? How about tranquility? What is a city or a suburb anyway, except a line in the sand?
On one side, we believe we are in charge, that our rules are the ultimate law. But beyond city limits, the dangerous forces of nature still hold sway.
For years, we've assumed our struggles with wild animals were mostly behind us, especially our triumph over the big predators, ones that used to haunt our dreams. We're better off without wolves and mountain lions and grizzly bears, aren't we? Now some scientists are starting to wonder as they investigate unsettling changes around the world. Forests we believe we were protecting are mysteriously disappearing. Coral reefs are dying before our very eyes. Ravenous pests running rampant in our subdivisions.
Could the scratching at our back door, the decline of coral, the vanishing of trees, all be linked to the disappearance of predators?
Answers are turning up in out-of-the-way places, on the front lines of our most recent advances into the natural world.
Boats have never been here before. A valley is being transformed by a flood. All that's left are the marooned, and they're growing desperate. Racing against the rising tide is biologist Luis Balbas.
Right now they are alive, but in a few days, maybe in 2 weeks, they will die. All the leaves will fall down and the animals are in danger because they're going to starve.
Balbas and his team will save over 9,000 animals, one by one. But those they reach are the lucky ones, creatures in the right place at the right time. Most will not be saved. Their loss is part of the cost of harnessing a river's power. The benefit? Electricity for millions of Venezuelans. But this is not a parable about the painful trade-offs of economic development. It's the story of a vast, unplanned experiment. One that involves the transformation of hilltops into scattered islands. What will unfold here? Clues can be found 37 miles upriver on a similar chain of islands. They were created by another hydroelectric project, completed almost 2 decades ago. And since then, researchers have been tracking intriguing changes. For biologist John Terborg, it's a scientific opportunity he daydreamed about for years.
We're in an extremely unusual place, bizarre by anybody's criteria. It's artificial in every respect. A huge dam has produced a lot of islands out of what was a continuous landscape before. Yet that's what makes it interesting for us, because in fact it is a gigantic experiment.
Spanning 1,600 square miles in eastern Venezuela, Lake Guri and hundreds of its islands are completely man-made. Cartographers have already redrawn their maps, but transformations of plant and animal life are still being charted. Every time he visits, Terborg sees dramatic changes.
Look at that, Mylene. Look at all those trees. This one has died, that one has died, this next one has died, that one has died. The overall impression is mortality.
On the small islands, only the toughest plants now survive. Those that remain are heavily defended, armed with thorns or chemicals. It's hard to imagine that this place was once part of a lush forest. But not long ago, most of what is now Lake Guri was an unbroken expanse of green. Before the flood, Guri was a riot of plant life, vibrant and diverse. Living among the plants were animals from the small and furtive to the large and powerful. Each had a role to play in an intricate community. Dominating this ecosystem were the top predators, with muscle, speed, and size on their side. In the middle of the food chain were animals like howler monkeys, which ruled the treetops, protecting territory with their signature calls. Today, Guri is strangely quiet, its silence seldom broken.
Iguana, 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 sequía. Iguana, iguana, sequía.
Okay, John, and how's the work going over there in Sequía, Cambio?
For scientists spread out across the archipelago, the evening radio call tempers the sense of isolation.
Ken and I will be heading out early. We're going to do a census of miedo and rocas, and after we finish that, which may be 9 o'clock or so, we'll be headed your way to pick you guys up and bring you back here, over.
From island to island, teams are encountering telltale patterns of destruction.
Here, so now we'll just have to tie some things up in Sakia. Over.
On Iguana Island, things are out of whack. Its hungry reptiles live at 10 times normal density. Also stripping leaves are howler monkeys. They are up to 50 times more crowded than on the nearby mainland. This is no monkey paradise.
Because there's so many of them in relation to the food resources that they need to survive. These animals turn antisocial. They fight a lot whenever there's an attractive food resource. And so we see the group structure completely breaking down. We don't record any grooming behavior. The young don't play. We do not see any of those behaviors. On tiny islands where there are trapped howler monkey groups, the animals are completely silent.
On a different island, another plant wrecking force is out of control. Leafcutter ants are running amok at 100 times their normal numbers. In a relentless parade, they carry bits of leaf to their underground nests.
We're on one of the smaller islands of Lago Guri here, and it's in a completely pathological state. The leafcutter ant has reduced the vegetation of this island to tatters. Normally, their numbers don't reach the extraordinary levels that have produced this scene of desolation.
How did the ants, the iguanas, and the monkeys become so destructive? Terborg suspects that as the floodwaters created islands, a key group of animals fled. The big predators. In their absence, their prey began wreaking havoc.
Foremost among the missing animals are the predators, and they haunt the place by not eating their prey. And indeed, the whole system suffers because effectively the whole system breaks down. The vegetation goes through a convulsion, and out of it will come a very, very different kind of world.
It's a hypothesis that's consistent with Guri's strange pattern of clues. But can so much damage really be traced back to an old flood? Terborg's colleague, biologist Cesar Aponte, is seeking evidence in tortoises.
Look what I found today.
You had a good afternoon.
It's amazing. I catch like more than 8 tortoises. And
by counting shell rings, Aponte has discovered a baby boom. It took place 17 years ago. That's when the waters rose, and many changes swept the region, including the departure of predators. In the accidental lab of Lake Guri, Terborg is finding new depth in the ancient role of predators. And what he's uncovering does not stop at these shores.
Now, you might think that little islands in the middle of a lake in Venezuela might not have much relevance to what everybody experiences in normal life, but that's not really true. This is a process we call fragmentation, but it's a very widespread one. It occurs almost everywhere that human beings intervene into a wild land.
The virtual islands that we live on, like the real ones in Lake Guri, were created with the best intentions. In cities and suburbs, we've pushed predators aside or killed them outright. Some say we're now living with the consequences. Herbivores and scavengers are rampant in much of North America. They're spreading Lyme disease and rabies. They're damaging property. To what extent is the removal of predators to blame? This question spurs a hot debate, even as some researchers advocate bringing back what's missing. It's an obvious question. If we've created problems by kicking out the predators, why can't we just put them back? The answer, unfortunately, isn't simple. Let's face it, predators are dangerous. Inviting them back could compromise our basic safety, and there goes the neighborhood. And deeper questions arise. Can predators survive in today's modern landscapes? Even if we could restore them, would it make a difference? Answers are coming from a surprising place, America's premier wilderness. It's a landscape that transports us back to the American West. This was the world's first national park. It remains a symbol of the untouched wild. Yet far from the crowds at Old Faithful, clues are emerging that something has thrown Yellowstone out of kilter. When hydrologist Bob Beshta arrived here in 1996, he noticed something wrong with the Lamar River. It was an early hint of a broader pattern of disturbances.
The hydrologic signature was the one that initially grabbed me, and it was that I have a stream that has overwidened. I have eroding banks along this entire reach here. I'm losing soil, which is a very precious resource in any system, sediments being pushed up on top of soils that have been there for hundreds or thousands of years. I had a river that was in chaos, but I didn't understand why.
A rare photograph from the early 1900s of this same stretch of river shows that willow shoots once protected the banks.
The interesting thing to me about this photograph is that it shows a fully vegetated stream bank on the other side, in contrast to what we're seeing today. The vegetation is just totally gone. And so the animals and species that depend upon this vegetation, it's just not here for them.
Beshta has documented Yellowstone's changes, but he and others are trying to explain why the park is so different from the place described by early explorers. "150 years ago, large carnivores like mountain lions are more abundant. Wolves keep elk on the run. Trappers report rivers abounding in beavers. Bison, numbering millions across the western plains, roam through the park. By the 1990s, the picture has changed. Beavers are scarce in Yellowstone's northern range. The number of songbirds is reduced in some areas along with their habitat. But perhaps most perplexing of all are the missing trees. Aerial photographs taken in the park in 1954 and again in 1992 reveal a dramatic change. Fewer large aspen trees among the conifers and little new growth. The park's oldest aspens are at the end of their days. How could entire forests disappear right in the middle of a protected wilderness? That's what biologists Bill Ripple and Eric Larson are investigating.
We're really at a critical level for the overstory aspen here in Yellowstone, because unless we get some new development in another 50 years, there aren't going to be any aspen trees here in Yellowstone. I think that would be a tragedy.
Ripple and Larson had a list of suspects in the aspen's disappearance. At first, they considered climate change. But if that were the cause, they reasoned, aspens should be declining throughout the area.
Well, we looked at the aspen outside the park and in the park, and we found it cannot be global warming because outside the park there were a lot more flourishing aspen than in the park.
Then they turned to the next suspect, fire. Could the reduction of forest fires in the park be hurting the aspens? These are trees that in fact thrive after a burn. But the huge fire of 1988 ultimately produced few large trees. Ripple and Larson need another clue. So they look within the aspens themselves. They drill cores from nearly 100 trees. By counting the growth rings, one per year, they can determine a tree's age. The cores are telling a story. There are almost no middle-aged trees. Most are at least 70 years old.
And then we say, wow, this might be it right here. The aspen stopped regenerating in the 1930s and hasn't regenerated since, throughout all of the 20th century.
What could have happened in the park back then? Ripple and Larson know of one significant change. By the 1930s, Yellowstone's last wolf was dead. In the 1800s, we entered this realm which wolves had ruled as top predators for millennia. We sized them up as a threat. Between 1883 and 1917, more than 100,000 wolves were killed for bounty in Montana and Wyoming alone. By the 1970s, they were listed as endangered in the US. Biologist Doug Smith has studied wolves for most of his life. He sees the amazing possibility that their absence could somehow be connected to Yellowstone's missing forests and eroding riverbanks.
This animal, wolves, was a part of North American ecosystems. And a big question for biologists worldwide is what has been the effect of removing large carnivores?
An experiment that began in 1995 for a completely different purpose could help to answer this question.
8 Canadian gray wolves were locked in small metal cages, prisoners despite overwhelming nationwide.
In an intensely controversial act of wildlife management, Doug Smith and colleagues brought 31 gray wolves from Canada to Yellowstone. What grabbed the headlines was the politics of predators. But their effect on the environment would become the more enduring story. Soon after their release, the wolves are seen traveling in packs. A powerful hunting tactic for these top predators.
We try and keep track of all the different packs of wolves in Yellowstone. Right now, that's 14 packs, about 150 wolves. And so keeping track of them is a difficult job. We know all the packs, we know the history of all the packs, and we know individual wolves. But as we follow them, day by day, week by week, month by month, we're learning there's a lot more to this than just wolves. We're learning that wolves may mean a lot to this ecosystem, a lot more than we ever dreamed.
The wolves' impact starts with their kills.
In a lot of ways, a wolf kill is not an ending, but a beginning. Every wolf kill becomes kind of a small epicenter of animal activity. Ravens, magpies, coyotes, bald eagles, golden eagles. If it's not the dead of winter, grizzly bears, maybe even black bears. So these kills are extremely important to the ecological community of Yellowstone.
Long after the larger scavengers have left the scene, insects pursue their share. In this way, one wolf kill serves hundreds. But Doug Smith thinks the wolves have an even greater impact. By killing elk, they may be literally reshaping the landscape.
Cow elk killed by wolves. What's interesting is this elk is lying dead in a patch of luxuriantly growing willow. These willows right around here are doing exceptionally well, and we think it's because the elk are spending less time eating them, and that's allowing these willows around here to get a good growth. This is all in the last 4 or 5 years.
It's a critical piece of evidence, a break in the case of the missing trees. Research suggests that the elimination of Yellowstone's wolves allowed the elk to browse aspens and willows brazenly. Though other factors may have played a role, it seems the disappearance of trees and streamside vegetation can be traced to the missing wolves. Now, where elk are on the run, trees and shrubs are starting to come back. And other species appear to be benefiting as well.
And when I first did the beaver survey for Yellowstone in 1996, there were no beaver colonies in this whole area. And this colony has just come in and they've settled right here. First colony in Lamar Valley probably in decades. That's just, oh, there it is, swimming. There's a beaver swimming into the lodge. There he is, right there. Oh, yeah, jeez. This is a vivid example of wolf reintroduction in that this beaver lives on the willows in this area. This beaver colony is very likely here because of the reintroduction of wolves.
Yellowstone's past may be a picture of its future. Once again, willows are offering beavers the materials they need to construct their dams. In turn, beaver ponds offer extra water and a buildup of nutrients, so plants can flourish on the banks as they did more than 70 years ago.
Wolves, through elk, through the vegetation, may actually control the character of the Lamar River, and it's just a mind-boggler to me.
By putting back one thing, we're restoring a whole bunch of things. An entire system, really, and how that system works. And so that should give people who may never see a wolf a strong feeling of hope.
Researchers like Doug Smith are starting to see the advantages of bringing back top predators. But are we willing to pay the price of living alongside powerful animals again? People who live just beyond Yellowstone's borders were among the first to face this question.
The first time I heard them, they were killing a deer in the pasture behind the house. And I could hear the deer crying, and I couldn't see what was going on. And I wasn't really aware that we had wolves around then until the next morning when I went out looking for whatever I was going to find in the pasture. It looked like they ran it through a lawnmower. Easy.
Ranchers such as Marina Smith were contending with wolves just months after their return to Yellowstone.
Way around. Way around. You know, it was a fallacy that the wolves were ever going to stay in the park. And so it's those of us that live around the park that are left to deal with it, and that's where the problem lies.
In fact, there is a mediator between people and predators in these parts. U.S. Fish and Wildlife biologist Joe Fontaine.
When I started as a biologist, you know, like all biologists, all you want to really do is go out in the woods and watch critters and, you know, do the things out in the wild. But unfortunately, when you take a job like this dealing with wolves, you're dealing more with people than you are the critter itself.
You get the rag box and
Fontaine believes that keeping the peace requires tracking the wolves and taking out those that develop a taste for livestock. Roughly a third of the wolves have been fitted with radio tracking collars. And for months, Fontaine has been on the trail of an alpha female, the pack leader, that has been leading raids on sheep.
Can I have your attention, please? Guys, but just gather around best you can. Bob, you want to come on up? About a week or so ago, we went in and we ended up taking 198, the female wolf, the alpha female, out of the Taylor Peak pack. I know it upset some people, probably made some people really happy. I'll be happy to answer any questions if anybody's got any on the situation.
I disagreed with the decision for the simple reason that it made my job harder. I'm trying to make a profit running livestock. And we got a pack of wolves running right on top of us, and knowing where they are is the single most important bit of information I have. And so it really, taking that wolf really, it made my job harder.
It's a turning point in cattle country when a fish and wildlife biologist hunts down a wolf and a rancher complains.
So we'll be okay that way.
Bringing back predators invites surprises. It isn't tidy. Whether we decide to expand this new strategy depends on our willingness to think of old adversaries in a new way.
Like predators on the land, the great hunters of the deep have long stirred our primal emotions. Giant squid, great whales, sharks, real or in the movies, they haunt our nightmares. But we know far less about the carnivores of the sea than we do about those on land. They're harder to study. They often have much greater ranges, and we're killing them off with ever-improving technology. Do the predators of the ocean regulate the ecosystems in which they live? Can missing carnivores be invited back? The research is just beginning, but a disturbing wave of ecological changes in the ocean is making this work more vital than ever. Hidden within the ocean, there is an array of masterful predators. As we gain better access to their world, we're poised to uncover how they shape their environments. Clues to their significance are beginning to emerge in the Caribbean.
Bill, have we got the core tubes? Yep. We got the handles? Yep. Duct tape? Nope. No.
Marine biologists Rich Aronson and Bill Precht have been studying one bay for decades. They first came here as students in the 1970s. Back then, the coral reef was a thrill to behold.
We're just going to run out to Columbus Park, right?
I think my first dive here was an epiphany. It was one of those kind of events that it just changed my life. It was so beautiful and so spectacular. There was so much coral. That's what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. How do I study coral reefs for the rest of my life? Give me an excuse to do this because it is so spectacular.
In its heyday, Discovery Bay, like most of the Caribbean, is teeming with life. At the top of the food web is a gamut of predators. Sharks, snappers, groupers, and jacks cruise near shore to feed. They are drawn by a tempting menu living on the reef. Surgeonfish, parrotfish, and other herbivores that graze algae growing on the coral. But this Discovery Bay lives only in photographs. All that's left to remind us of how vibrant this reef once was. Today, the hunting grounds of the big fish, the coral reefs, are dying, suffocating under a shaggy layer of algae. To figure out what caused this collapse, Aronson and Precht need to know if the coral die-offs have occurred before.
Because I'm a geologist, my education has trained me to look at the fossil record and try to pick up clues. An obvious place to look for the answers was in the geology of these reefs.
Reefs are built from colonies of tiny animals called polyps. Only the top layer of a reef is alive. Beneath are skeletons of past generations. As Aronson and Precht descend, they're traveling back in time thousands of years. Within this coral necropolis is a long record of the reef's health, a kind of medical chart. Aronson and Precht grind out a section of reef. This tube will capture over a millennium of history.
What we look at today is just this two-dimensional living surface, or in this case, dead surface, of a coral reef. And what we want to do is go down through this third dimension of time and try to reconstruct what that looks like historically.
This position. Okay, let me just start getting this tape off.
It may look like nothing more than mud, but within, telltale pieces of coral are preserved.
It looks like it was perfect. Just buried yesterday. It's just unbelievable.
All the corallites are perfectly preserved.
Amazing. So
For the last 1,000 years, the coral was healthy. But something unprecedented appears in the 1980s. The coral stops growing, recording when algae began taking over this reef.
what we see in these cores is that the composition is constant. The types of corals and the condition they're in is constant all the way up to the very tippy top of the core. And beyond that, boom, everything is different. So that indicates that something's happened in the last few decades, looks very much as though it has to do with human impact.
Pollution is often a suspect when it comes to environmental problems in the sea. But fisheries biologist Daniel Pauly is focusing on another factor in Discovery Bay.
So cheaper. Different type.
In a nearby Jamaican fish market, Pauly seeks clues to the reef's collapse.
They've been hanging the whole morning, haven't they? Yeah. These are big ones.
Come in and little kids, they would like one small one.
Yeah. Haven't they been bigger before? I mean, if you
don't have any bigger ones.
When you were young, did you have more big ones? You remember more big fish in the market?
Yes.
But generally, you don't see them much, the big ones. You have a lot of them in the market regularly?
No.
They've only from time to time. In the Caribbean, I've heard many times people say, oh, the Jamaican, they love small fish. But it's not so. It is that it's all they have. And that's why, that's what you find in the market. That's all they have.
For Pauly, the absence of big fish is of critical significance, although sellers here have accepted it as normal.
You can have a young woman working the market, having the impression there's lots of fish there because she works hard, right? But what her grandmother was selling, she doesn't know really. And therefore, she doesn't know that there is far less available. But it matters to us, it should at least, because it tells us that something big is happening.
The disappearance of large predatory fish is part of a bigger pattern, one that connects this dwindling market to oceans worldwide.
What would surprise people about the state of the ocean is how devastating fishing itself is. It is the force that impacts on ecosystems most. It is now known that in the last 40, 50 years, we have lost about 90% of all large fish throughout the world.
And Jamaica was not immune to this worldwide trend.
In the 70s, there were offshore banks and offshore waters that belonged to Jamaica that were completely unfished. What was there at the time were especially big groupers and snappers. The big groupers are really the most sensitive organism on reef. They are the first to go.
What would happen as boats continued to remove big predatory fish? Pauly might have expected some kind of chain reaction. He knows that on land, we might have seen an explosion of herbivores taking over the system. But he will never know if the same thing happened on the reef. That's because we kept fishing down the food web, removing not only large carnivores, but also their prey. The prey fish, the herbivores, are vital to reefs. Their grazing helps keep fast-growing algae in check. As fishermen removed them, only one significant grazer remained, the spiny urchin, which soon succumbed to a disease. And now the fished-out reef could no longer resist a devastating outbreak of algae.
And then, in a sense, the whole pyramid is eaten up from inside, keels over, and you have no reef, no fishery, no ecosystem, nothing. In that sense, there are many, many spots of the ocean that are empty, and these spots are spreading.
Is Discovery Bay a warning of the future of coral reefs around the world? And if so, what can we do to change the course? On the nearby Caribbean island of St. Lucia, the reef is in much better shape than Jamaica's, but still, fishermen here are already paying a steep personal price.
Come right there, come right there.
Edward Mongrew's nets are coming up empty. He can't always count on the nearshore reefs.
Before, you was catching more fish before with the net. But with today, there's so many fishing nets today. So you will find that the fish are scared and you have to go and search for them.
Mongrew and others have had to work harder and push their luck to find big fish.
At times you go fishing, you spend the whole day fishing, you don't catch nothing. At times you don't even come back the same day because you lost sight because you can't see the land. A lot of things happen there. Last year, we have another one, 2 of them, and one died in the boat, and one survived. They find them right somewhere by Cuba and so on.
Will the big reef fish ever return to safer waters, closer to shore? It's a question that's been on the minds of St. Lucians, particularly at this time of year.
Casting a net into the water. Then he called to them, "Come."
This is the fisherman's feast.
Fishers of man.
Every summer, generations come together to bless the fleet.
And bearing in mind,
The ceremony has been taking on greater urgency. Because what are fishers without fish? St. Lucians have decided that prayer is not enough. They've embraced a bold new experiment to revive the reef, and in doing so, bring back the big fish. In the mid-1990s, St. Lucians established a network of zones off-limits to fishing. They are marine reserves, similar to national parks on land. Will the plan work? Will the predatory fish return?
Quite unlikely you see only one butterfly fish.
And what do we expect?
Kai Wolf, manager of the new effort, watches over these protected waters as well as zones set aside for other purposes, including fishing. Today, Wolf and his team are joined by visiting biologist Sati Aramay. She's aware that times have never been harder for big fish.
Despite of all.
Despite of all.
Marine reserves are not a new idea. Fish had refuges in the sea when we weren't able to go into the deeper areas, into the rocky areas, but now our gear allows us to go there. And so fish really have no natural refuges.
The reserves have been in place for only a few years. The team is looking for signs of recovery, but finding them is a challenging job.
An ecosystem is not easy to characterize. It takes a lot of different types of monitoring in order to figure out what's going on. We're looking at the complete ecosystem dynamic. We're not just looking at an individual fish species. We're accounting for the interactions that the top predators have with their prey, the herbivores, and with the plant communities that are in the ocean.
Arame finds good news. Smaller predators are already returning. In only a few years, some fish populations have tripled in the reserves. The survey team next spots an even bigger predator, a grouper. One of the best signs yet of the reserve's promise. And just beyond the boundaries, fishermen are starting to catch bigger fish again.
If we used to fish everywhere, so we will find fish in St. Lucia. That will be overfishing. So now it is a good idea with the reserve. I like it now, and a lot of fishermen like it.
The return of predators is welcomed by both fishermen and scientists. These places in the sea and on the land differ in their details. Each is comprised of a complex interplay of organisms and influences, but they are providing fresh opportunities to study predators, to explore the idea that they are a powerful force that keeps ecosystems strong and resilient. It's a view that will guide and challenge us as we seek to maintain the health of the planet. Long ago, it was us against them. Small bands of humans looked out from caves. They saw a world teeming with dangerous predators. Today, the tables are turned. Now, large predators all too often cower in small enclosures or shrinking habitats. Once fearsome beasts look out at a dangerous world overrun by humans. The very survival of big predators is now at stake. When once we asked, can we live with them? We're now asking, can we live without them?